What a pleasure. What an amazing TEDx. So imagine you had an opportunity in your life to consider the question of education without looking at all of the restrictions and the complexities that come with introducing education to a country like yours. Imagine you lived in a mythical place like California, where there were no laws about what kind of education you could create. If you could imagine the best possible place for children to learn, if you could imagine the most incredible learning experiences day after day, and if you could imagine starting a school with two questions in your mind, two powerful questions that would shape how you rethought education. And those two questions: where does competence come from? How do people become those kind of people that we admire, who can take on any new challenge, like Ahmed and his TEDx Cairo, his little change that was part of that revolution of Arab Spring? How do people become like Susanna and her passion about this simple thing like mud that transforms lives and transforms how people think about housing? And the other question is, are there possibly experiences that children have that predispose them to heroic behavior later in life? Is there something about what happens in childhood that makes you that kind of person? So I started my summer camp with those two questions. And this was my summer camp. I made it for me to answer questions. This was, in fact, my own private laboratory where I could experiment on other people's children. And because it was my camp, we built stuff. This is what I do when I have time for myself. And this was a passion I could share with children in this context. We built a roller coaster with 30 meters of track. We built incredible cars that you power by rowing. And as we were doing this, we started to have some fundamental realizations about how children learn. And one of them, it seems so obvious, and yet it's almost gone from education, from traditional education. And I'll tell you now, and when you see it, you'll remember how obvious this is. We think with our hands. It's true. 30% of our brains is dedicated to processing information from our hands. Just like those cockroaches, we sense the world through these, and we make sense of the world through these. The ideas that we form in our heads, we often metaphorically shape with our hands. We see the same parts of our brain light up. And in fact, if you pick something up, you probably have something in your hand right now that you can use. I want you to turn to the person next to you and poke them with it. Go on. Okay, now put that object down and poke them with your finger. Okay, if we had you in one of those giant machines with a magnetic donut, and we were looking at the activity in your brain, the exact same parts of the brain light up, whether I poke you with the thing or I poke you with my finger. And that's because our brains are wired for tools, for things that we put in our hands. When I put this in my hand, my brain reshapes to include the end of this thing as part of my body. And it doesn't matter if this is a few centimeters long, if it's a pencil, or it's 2 meters long. If I poke someone with a 2-meter stick, my body is extended. The model I have in my brain of my very own body is extended to the end of that stick. You should let your children play with sticks. It's good for the brain. Such a simple idea. And yet in classrooms, We ask children to sit in desks and use the exact same tools hour after hour after hour, never getting a chance to expand their brains with the use of different tools. We have built some amazing stuff at Tinkering School. When you give children a chance to both come up with an idea, build it, and test it in the real world to make a boat that might sink, not just their minds, but their hearts are involved in that project. They are passionate about the result. So we discovered a new idea. Create a meaningful experience, and the learning will follow. And what that means is that if you focus first, before you even think about curriculum, before you worry about math, reading, writing, if you focus on designing the experience, the rest of it you get for free. So what would a school be like if it came from a place where children could build airplanes and fly them? My little summer camp became famous, and I got to speak on the main stage at TED. This was a transformative moment for me. My little camp, which I ran at my house, became world famous. I got invited to speak to educators around the world about this little idea. And as I spoke to them, I realized there were parts missing from my idea. It couldn't be a school. I had some good parts, and I had some bad parts. And working with these educators in places literally as far away as Bahrain and as close to home as San Francisco, my nearest city, these incredible people shared these ideas, and we put together something that made sense. And I want you to know, I'm not an educator by training. I come from the world of computer technology. I used to manage an innovation group at Adobe, which was a great job, and I left it for this. So I'm the guy who teaches children how to make perfectly round balls of sand. And now I'm going to make them out of mud. But this idea that we started to frame with these educators was big and complicated. And in order to understand it, I had to draw it, because that's how I think, and I'm going to draw it for you right now. So, if the standard traditional pedagogical unit of a traditional school is a day divided into these 45-minute periods, a little bit of math, a little bit of science, a little bit of history, a little bit of lunch, a little bit of physical education, if that's how we think of children's education now, I want you to consider a new pedagogical unit. We call it the ARC. Every ARC has a theme, a guiding idea which shapes how we create the education for the children. For this example, I'm going to use wind. Wind, just such a common element of our lives, but if we look at it closely, there's so much that we can explore. And that's what we do. We call this first phase of the ARC exploration. And in this phase, we create a landscape for the children to explore. And we populate this landscape with ideas about wind that are represented by actual people and things. Learning should be tangible. So we invite somebody in who generates power using wind. You guys do a lot of that here. We invite someone in who uses wind to transport goods around the world, or studied how that happened. We bring in artists who work with wind to create sculptures. We bring scientists in who study the meteorological sources of wind and the effects of wind. And through this landscape, we take the children on a journey. They meet these people, they work with these ideas, they see the actual thing in real life. We leave the school all the time. And the children become inspired by these ideas, and we capture that inspiration. They work with a collaborator, an adult, what you would call a teacher, to create a declaration. This declaration is the transition from our exploration phase into a new phase. Each of these declarations is a clear statement about what they intend to build or do or practice or learn about in this next phase. We call this phase expression, because it's not just about building. It could be theater, could be singing, could be writing, could be anything, but we want them to express some new understanding about wind. A design, build, practice to create a new kind of windmill. The exploration of a hypothesis about the effect of wind in a certain environment, a microclimate. A series of practicing of writing and performing songs and building a stage ends in a performance that the kids have created about wind. And that performance happens in the last phase of our arc. And we call it exposition, a chance to show the world their understanding of wind. We open the doors of the school, and strangers flood in. They come from other schools. They are friends of the experts that we've been working with. They are friends of the parents, and they are the parents themselves. And we put on a show. We have a science museum of wind. We have a poetry museum of wind. And then all of that notes and progress and the daily reflections get compiled together to create, in a moment of reflection, a portfolio, a clear description of what they learned in this project, the decisions that they made, and the kinds of things they tried. This portfolio, over the course of their lives at my school, begins to accumulate projects. And when they graduate, if they started with us in kindergarten, they'll have done 60 projects taken from that moment of inspiration all the way to completion. We give this back to them when they walk out the door, and they take that right to a university. We've contacted some of the highest universities in the United States, explained how our school works, and they say, yes, we will take those people who know how to get things done, how to work with their own ideas. So you're asking yourself, what does a school like this really look like? Let's have a peek at Brightworks. Last night, I collected images that were put on our blog for Wednesday. This is a peek into our school 3 days ago. We're in the end of an expression phase. Here's Alexander cutting a piece of steel to be the axle of a 7-person pedal-powered camper where the children will sleep and drive the camper themselves on a 3-day camping trip next week. Here's his brother, Daniel, working with one of the experts in bicycle design who has come in to share his time with children more than 20 hours over the course of this expression phase. Here's their teammate, Zeta, working to shape and take the sharp edges off that piece of steel. Zeta is 10 years old. Here are the youngest children at our school, 6 and 7 years old, working on creating eggs, papier-mâché eggs, for a play that they're doing about the life cycle of birds. Lola and Bruno. Here are the kids going to lunch. They've decided to bring the chickens that the youngest children hatched as part of their exploration of the life cycle of birds. They're taking them to the park because the chickens don't get enough outdoor time. Here are our 9, 10, and 11-year-olds rehearsing a play that they've been working on now for 2 weeks. In order to do the play, because there are special effects involved, they had to create their own theater. This is a 400-pound stage. It took the entire school to lower to the ground. Having put it down, they had to immediately test it. Occasionally, when you look at your own pedagogy, you have to know when to put it aside. So we have this phrase we use sometimes in our school: screw the arc, make the cheese. We invented this because a few weeks ago, we had an opportunity to work with a world-famous cheese maker. It didn't fit into our arc, which was around the topic of locomotion, energy applied to move in a single direction. What does that have to do with cheese? Absolutely nothing. But you can't say no when you have an opportunity to meet with someone who can explain to children the history of cheese in 4 hours, and in doing so, make cheese with children. Similarly, when it became apparent that the little eggs were starting to hatch for those chickens that we were taking to the park, the children demanded and organized an overnight vigil to watch those eggs hatch. For the first time in our history, almost all of the student body slept in the school. The next day, a celebration. And one baby chick. Educators come from around the world to visit our school. This is Steve Davey from the world-famous Opal School in Portland in North America. Climbing on a structure built by 12-year-olds who had just recently raised these giant tree trunks up against the wall and then screwed 2x4s to them to create a bike rack. The bike rack never came into existence. It was too much fun to climb. We treat the city as an extension of our school. Using bicycles and buses, we are trying to get the children to see the world as a place of learning. This is our school, and this is our dream. We make a lot of mistakes. We're constantly making mistakes, and so are the children. Working with the collaborators, we are creating our school together. It is amazing, it is frustrating, and it is the most rewarding work I've ever done. Thank you very much.